Part 3 in the webinar, we're now going to address the projected case. You've done your baseline analysis, and now you are projecting what will the energy use of the building be after the project. For the end result of this analysis, there's a few things that are going to be must-haves that we're going to expect to see. We're going to expect to see for each measure a description. What is it? We'll need to know a cost, and we'll need to know its utility usage. And that number should be not in terms of dollars, but it should be in the terms of the respective unit of that piece of equipment. So kilowatt hours, MMBTUs, gallons of water, whatever it may be. We also need to know operating hours, and if you have cut sheets on the equipment as well, that would be helpful. We're also going to expect that you perform an expected useful life calculation and justify that, and we'll discuss what that should look like shortly. And finally, you'll also need to provide your assumptions that went into your analysis, whether it's weather normalization data, occupancy rate, hours of operation, things like that. Now let's talk about the project useful life. All of our projects are going to have to calculate a useful life, and the reason for that is because the Texas PACE statute requires that the assessment period cannot exceed the useful life of the project. In other words, we're not going to finance projects for longer than they're going to last. Now that's pretty straightforward for a single measure, but you might be asking, well, what do I do if I have multiple measures, possibly with different useful lives? And in a situation like that, we will allow you to do a weighted average useful life based on cost. And I'll show you an example of the math behind such a project shortly. So what really needs to happen is that for all of our projects, the engineer or the contractor is going to perform a calculation showing the useful life of the project, and they'll need to provide some backup. Where did they get their assumptions from? And then ultimately, the useful life will be validated by the independent third-party reviewer. Let's go through a calculation of how to do a weighted average useful life. In this example, we have two measures. There's an HVAC system and an LED lighting system. The HVAC is going to cost $500,000 and its useful life is 20 years. The LED is going to cost $100,000 and its useful life is 10 years. So to calculate the weighted average useful life, you multiply the $500,000 of the HVAC times the 20 years, add that to $100,000 times 10 years for the LED system, and then divide the total by the total cost of the project, in this case $600,000. When you do that, you calculate a weighted average useful life of 18.3 years, which essentially means that the limit on the financing term for this project would be 18.3 years. Or in other words, we're not going to allow the PACE assessment term to exceed that weighted average useful life. With that, that brings us to the end of this section of the webinar. We've now created our baseline, and we've also created our projected case for our energy model. And in part 4 of our webinar, we're going to discuss how to calculate savings based on those two scenarios.